Welcome to The Hype Within, exploring journeys of authentic leadership and growth. On the show, tech leaders will share their stories of developing their leadership skills and challenges they faced along the way. You'll learn about their approaches to self-reflection and personal growth, and how they've been able to build a foundation of authenticity that has propelled them to success. I'm your host, Hana Jacover, B2B marketing leader turned leadership and executive coach. Are you ready to get hyped up? Let's dive in. Welcome back, leaders, to The Hype Within. It's good to be back with you. And I'm so excited because today, I swear, every episode we talk about Kyle Lacey. Kyle, you're so popular. Unprompted too, people will bring up, oh, I like what Kyle Lacey's doing. And it's true, doing great things. And today we have the privilege of having Ben Battaglia on, who was actually referred by Kyle Lacey and said, you got to have Ben on the podcast. So here we are. And Ben's here with us. And Ben is the VP of marketing for Your Money Line. And he's going to give us a little intro about who he is and his journey. Hey, Ben.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Hana. Really great to be here. Have to say, for all the Kyle Lacey hype, once you work with him for the better part of a decade, he's overhyped, but I'm just kidding. He's wonderful. One of my favorite bosses of all time. So thanks for the referral, Kyle. Like Hana said, I'm Ben. I am the VP of marketing at Your Money Line, and we are financial coaching as a benefit for employees. So B2B SaaS company, you buy us as a benefit for your employees. And through a combination of real financial coaches as well as AI guidance, we help employees have healthier, better financial lives. So definitely was attracted to this company by the mission of helping people have better financial lives. It feels like something we all struggle with at different times is stress about money. So feeling a lot of energy and excitement about this new startup I'm a part of. And before that, I started my career in the nonprofit world, actually, leading a local nonprofit. Actually thought I was going to end up being a pastor, which is funny, kind of informs my leadership journey. And maybe we can dig into that a little in the future. But ended up going to business school and pivoting into tech, where I worked at Lessonly, led inbound marketing and sales development there, and then got acquired and worked at Seismic, where I led branding comms across the world for them. So lots of fun adventures in tech, and excited to be here with you, sharing all the dirt of it all.
Oh my gosh, I have so many questions. I have so many questions. And I lost my pen. Usually I write down because I have ADHD and I forget what I want to say. But the first thing was Your Money Line. That sounds so cool. And it sounds like it's closing a very, very much needed gap of financial literacy, or at least like helping people understand. So like, do you help them understand like their equity, for example?
Yeah, that could be part of it. We like to talk about helping people with financial problems, no matter where you're at, like 1 to 10. It could be 9 or 10, where you're like, help me understand my equity. I have a more advanced financial life. How does this work? Or it could be 1 and 2, where you're like, I've never had a budget. I have more bills than I know what to do with. Can you help me figure out how to pay them? And so we have certified like CFPs and financial coaches that actually know how to do all that stuff with people. So huge gambit.
Wow, that's amazing. I would have killed for that. Well, not actually. I'm not going to kill anyone, but theoretically speaking, I would have loved to have that benefit, when I was working for other orgs and actually understanding, okay, 401k, right? Is this the best setup, right? Like, should I manually be investing, and do I just pick something, or what happens when I want to move it?
Totally.
What does my equity look like? What the heck is a cliff? Like, understanding all of that. I don't think that people know when they get into it, especially younger folks.
Yeah, I remember in my first job being handed like the benefit guide, and like it's full of acronyms. I have no idea what any of this is as like a 22 or 23-year-old trying to figure out what to do here. And so we're solving a need, which is fun.
Yeah.
We have a Slack channel of like feedback from people, and it's just really encouraging to see all the like stories of real life change. Definitely in a world of tech, when it sometimes feels like you're out there selling like more SaaS to another SaaS company, to have some like real life impact is fun to wake up to in the morning.
Yes. I feel like you just summarized part of the reason why I left like working for orgs. I'm like, I don't want to be a part of this like fake selling tech to other tech so other tech, all the other people who own the tech can make more money. Like that just didn't make sense to me, but
Yes. Wow, this is really all the hot takes on this pod. I'm here for it.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, so you mentioned you thought you were going to become a pastor. Very interesting. I'm then assuming that faith and religion have an important place in your life, or at least did at one point. And that does tie into leadership, right? Because, I mean, obviously, that is a leadership position. And I'm curious how that has evolved. Like, what's that story and how that has influenced your leadership style?
Yeah. So coming out of college, definitely something that was like my whole life so much that I wanted to dedicate my vocation to it. And being in that position, leading a religious nonprofit, definitely learned a ton about leadership. And what's interesting about the nonprofit world, religious or not, is that you rarely have formal power. Whereas you get made the VP of something in a tech company, you have formal power.
Mm-hmm.
But you really have to learn to lead people who are all volunteers, and you have to like convince and connect with them enough to get them to go somewhere you want to for zero pay, and you have no authority over them. And so I learned a ton about actually connecting with people, how to care about them, how to help develop them and grow them, that I think served me really well as I moved on to actually having, a more formal business leadership role.
Fascinating. Okay, yeah. And I mean, everyone I talk to on this show too, right? Like it all comes down to understanding people and relationship building and how you're doing that, understanding all the players, the influence, and just what you're talking about. Like, how do you influence people when you don't necessarily have that? I forget when you're thinking about the different power structures, but it's like you have legitimate power, maybe, where it's like you actually earn that power versus it's kind of like coercive power.
Yes.
So that's very interesting. So then how would you describe your leadership style?
Yeah, so I think it's a combination of two things. One, I would call serving leadership. And I know you've had a number of people on this podcast talk about servant leadership, so we don't have to go too deep there. I will say I do like the word serving over servant.
Me too.
I think in a servant, there's this like weird context of like, I do whatever the boss says. And that's not the role of a leader, in my opinion. You want to be serving your team, but you do not act at the whims of your team. Like sometimes you have to make decisions that feel frustrating to your team, but they are the right thing for the business or for their growth. And so I do like that slight nuance of a distinction of like, I'm a serving leader, I'm not a servant leader.
I love that.
And we can dive into this at some point, but when I trained managers at Seismic on my team, I would take them through this serving leader course, like a micro course I designed. It was 5 weeks long to help them become better managers. And so that's something I'm passionate about is manager training. So maybe we come back to that.
Yes.
But another way I would describe my leadership is wholehearted leadership. And this is a phrase I stole from Brené Brown, our queen. And wholehearted leadership is really about 3 C's. It's about having courage and fostering that in your people. It's about having compassion for others and how you interact with them. And then it's about connection. When you talk about, my background is in nonprofit or within formal power, connection is a huge part of that. Like, how do you build real relationships with people and grow that over time? Because that's going to scale your ability to lead them.
Yeah.
To the moon.
That wholehearted leadership. That's a new one. Thank you for bringing that. Yeah, servant. I totally agree with you on the note around servant leadership versus serving. Like servant is giving exploitation, and we're not here for that. I like that reframe of serving. Like I'm a serving leader, and wholehearted leadership. That sounds like a really good combination that allows you to serve the people, but also do it in a way that's like seems very connected to values. Like, would you say that those 3 C's are also part of your core values?
Yeah, absolutely. It does feel connected to values. It also feels like some would say, softer style of leadership or more empathetic style of leadership. It's not like, we're going to go charge the hill and I'm going to drive you hard to move fast and get there. It really is a belief that caring about people is the heart of good leadership. And that the output of care is hard feedback, helping them grow. It's not just all sunshine and rainbows, but the output of care is meaningful outcomes.
Yes. Yeah. There's a big difference between being nice and people pleasing, right, which is actually very dangerous
Yes.
in a workplace environment. I think it can cause a lot of toxic situations. And caring in a way where it's direct and you're giving feedback, but it is compassionate. There is still empathy there because you have connected with the people, you've taken the time to build the trust. So yeah, I think that's an important distinction.
Yeah, I think a common fault I fell into as a new manager, and I think a lot of new managers do, is like, my job is to facilitate democracy. Like, what do the people want? That's what I'm going to advocate for as a manager. And to some extent, you have to listen, you have to hear people, you have to advocate for them. But to some extent, being a good leader is saying, I hear you, but let me point you somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And that's essential to really helping people grow.
Have you ever gotten backlash with this style of leadership in your career from somebody who does want to take the more traditional route of leadership?
Yeah, it's funny, as we were chatting ahead of this show, you mentioned talking about feedback that made you rethink your leadership approach. And this is definitely feedback. Probably the biggest piece of feedback is you're too nice. You don't have a bad cop bone in your body. You're gun shy here a little bit. And I encountered that especially like when you enter an organization where that's not the expectation or the culture of an organization. I went through an acquisition where we had this really human leadership team who cared so deeply about how people were living life outside of work, living healthy lives, and then went to a leadership team with a little more rigor in terms of we're going to drive outcomes and we need to hit our goals. And that clash was an interesting one. And a lot of my fellow marketing leadership members definitely gave me that feedback of like, it feels like you're too nice. Like, you got to push people harder. But I think my heart and what I came out of that was there is like a common conception they teach you in business school, which is that the job of a business is to serve the shareholders. And the change that's happening in business is not serving shareholders, but serving stakeholders. So that's everyone involved in business. It's not just the people who get the checks at the end. It's about serving your customers well, serving the planet, and serving our employees. And so to me, my responsibility, yes, is to work hard and drive an efficient organization that makes money, the operational side, but the relational side is just as important in my role as a leader. And so I've kind of settled on, I'm okay with too nice being the feedback about me. It's something I always have to keep my pulse on and be doing internal work around of like, okay, I know this to be true about myself. I have to be self-aware there. How do I respond here? What's the right way to respond? And have people in my life, whether that's coaches like you or bosses or peers who can kind of elbow me when I might be leaning a little gun shy. But that's something I feel proud of, being known as a manager people love to work with.
Yeah.
Even at the cost of too nice some occasionally here and there.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like, I think nice is an interesting word. I don't love the word nice. I prefer the word kind, because I think it ties closer to like the heart of things. I can be kind and also direct, right? Like nice sometimes can be used as a cover up. And so I think kindness, right? Like, I'm not ever going to be mad. I mean, sometimes I've been mad later on for being kind to somebody who didn't deserve it, but but in the moment, like leaning into kindness, you're most times you're probably not going to regret that.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. I had a friend, he was a customer at Lessonly, and then we got to be close, but he loved the word charitable to describe this. And he had this really thoughtful definition of the word charitable. I wish I had it on hand right now, but I do love that word. And I think about like, I am someone who is going to think of people in a charitable or make charitable assumptions about someone. That to me is just like another word that, to your point, nice can mean a lot of things, and nice can oftentimes is not just be used as a weapon rather than like a real compliment. So I like the precision of kind or charitable.
Yeah. I think too, really at the core of this is its intent, right? And understanding what does nice mean to you? What does kind mean to you? What's the intention behind that? And how does that show up? So, which is super important in anything. If something comes out of your mouth, it better align with your intention, and you better understand what you actually mean when you say those things. And I think that that also takes a lot of reflection. And like you said, people sort of giving you that feedback, showing you your growth edges and how they perceive you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that that is something, again, that I was not prepared for as a new manager, and many new managers aren't, is like the level of intentionality that you have to bring to be a good leader. Like there's a high barrier of just like thinking about other people when you become a manager that becomes so essential to your success. And it really is just about intent and intentionality.
Yeah. I mean, I know you'll agree given your stance on manager training in the course that you provide, but it's so lacking. I think that people watch people who are managing and they see all the things that they do, but they don't necessarily know how to embody, like how to be a manager, and
Mm-hmm.
all of the critical thinking, all of the mindfulness that goes into that. And I think that it surprises people what a big job it is and what an emotional job it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I absolutely agree. It is not something that most often you just promote someone who's a high performing IC. Like that is how you become a manager. And the expectation is around the operational pieces of the business, and the relational is totally left untalked about.
Yeah, because back to your original point, it's about the shareholders. At least that's the very traditional view. But we need to tell some shareholders, I think, need to receive the message around the key stakeholders versus only the shareholders.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But there's many that I could point out that need that message. Speaking of, let's talk controversy.
Oh, perfect.
And there's been some, yeah, I recently saw something that was very controversial. I think that we're in a weird state right now, just given the economy. And I mean, you see these very high-powered people talking about how the working population should posture themselves. However, the working population is like clawing, trying to like buy their groceries and pay their mortgages and also be happy in life. And there are some words being thrown around right now that are, yeah, very interesting. So curious, in today's climate, what's the most controversial leadership decision that you've recently seen, and what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah. I was thinking about this, and I think that popular topic for almost everyone right now is return to office. And just this week, I have seen article on article of like, after Labor Day, we need employees back in the office, or after October 1. And it feels like it has just ramped up.
Mm-hmm.
And my take on that is that in many cases, these return to office policies are really just ways to encourage employees leaving. They're ways to avoid a layoff. Like, oh, if we force people back into the office, they're just going to leave of their own accord, and we won't have to do another layoff here in this hard economic time. And so I am supportive of a flexible work culture. And so I think these RTO policies are, like you said, like people looking to drive more percentage increases in efficiency and not thinking about the wellness of their people. And I work at a wellness company, and I think that this is not like our forced RTO. There's definitely benefits to being back in the office. I get it. More junior employees get to learn from people. Maybe communication is faster. But I would be in favor of continuing flexible work policies and just being more upfront rather than just saying return to office to force people to leave the business. Like that's just abdicating your role as a leader and manager to have the hard conversations that you need to have with people. So that's my quick take on it. What do you think about all this return to office news?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you. And I think that that is actually a really interesting stance, to where it's to avoid or to, sort of go under the guise of return to office, when really it's like, we don't want to have to lay people off. And if we know we do this, people will leave. And it's real. It's happening. This is a non-industry specific example, but the company Grinder, yes, I know some of you would be like, what? But they did that. They wanted everybody to come back, and like it was a huge percentage. It was like 30 or 40% of the people left the company.
Yes,
They were like, no, thank
totally.
you. Goodbye. So then is it the Grinder exec team? Are they sitting up there like, yes, we did it? Or are they like, shit? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. But I think in most cases, I don't know about Grindr specifically, but it feels like if you're really saying employees are my stakeholders and I care about their well being, this sort of like hardline return to office policies doesn't feel like a win for caring for your wholehearted care for your employees.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I am super biased on the topic. I've worked from home my entire career.
Yeah.
My entire career, or have at least had that flexibility. And I mean, I don't know, like, I feel like sometimes it's a matter of teaching people how to work from home. Like, we didn't ever really teach people how to work from home. You have
Mhm.
to have that routine. You have to understand, like, what do I need to be successful to work from home? And I don't know that we gave that. I don't know a lot of organizations gave that to their employees. And it was sort of like, figure it out. Here's $1,000 stipend to go make your office what you want. But we're not actually going to talk about how you maintain balance, how you maintain productivity, how you set your day up and your tools up and your technology up to benefit or get you to a place where you can make the most out of working from home. So I think that for me, I think there's so many advantages to working from home. I think
Yeah.
everybody should have that option available. I think particularly if you're a working parent, particularly also if you are the default parent, there are
Mhm.
so many things on that individual's mind, like the mental load that that default parent has to hold all day long. And just to be able to like check one thing off of your list, when you have a minute is huge, huge.
Yes.
And
Huge.
then I think
Absolutely.
too, yeah, it's interesting to me to see some of the studies coming out around productivity. And I have this conversation with my partner all the time because he's in construction. So he has to go to the job site. He has to go talk to everybody and see how the project's going. And that makes sense, right? It doesn't work for everybody. But he tells me when he does go to the office versus the job site, he is so unproductive. First of all, the time that it takes for him to get ready and go to the office, like drive to the office, park, get it all situated at his desk. And then he's got 10 people coming up to him wanting to just chit chat. Yes, they're relationship building, but it's not at the opportune time. And so for him, like productivity just tanks. You get all of the water cooler chatting, and I'm not saying any of that is bad. I just don't think that it is always happening at the most opportune time to like build those relationships. And instead, you could be maximizing on the time where you're productive the most, and then find optimal time to build those relationships and that trust with other people. So that's my take.
Totally. I like what you're saying. I do think, there is value from being in person, face to face with people, like
Yes.
no doubt about it. But I do think to your point, like, what are the contexts we are creating around that? Like, how are we using that time? And maybe like, I'm trying to do deep work and get interrupted every 10 minutes at the
Mhm.
office is not the best context for deep work, but it may be the best context for that quarterly planning meeting or even our weekly planning meeting where it's like, face to face would be so much easier and like valuable for this project we're going to work closely together on. So I think you're right that each has its place and its role for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder too, because I've seen some studies that I don't have enough information to like give stats or anything like that, but I've seen some out there that say, well, Gen Z wants to go to the office. And you know what? I don't believe that. Like, I don't think that that is true. I want to like interview some Gen Z employees because they would probably rather be hanging out with their dog.
I'm chuckling because we have a hand raising, flag waving Gen Z on our team who loves to educate us elder millennials on everything that's cool in the world these days and how we're now officially old and not cool anymore. But
Yeah.
yeah, my interaction, at least with like younger employees, is they really appreciate the flexibility and see the value of the office here and there. But the work life balance and the focus they can have, I think younger employees, even than me, are way better about setting what kind of life they want to live and
Mhm.
how work fits into that, as opposed to and I think even older than me, default a little more to like work is my life and I fit life in outside of that. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I admire that. And stereotypically, the younger generation than me.
Yes, I do too. I think that we have a really interesting runway for an evolution in terms of leadership. I think obviously we're already seeing that with more millennials holding executive level positions to where they are, actually being able to make transformational change at their organization and leading very, very differently. And I think Gen Z is going to also do the same. And that is fascinating to me. Like, that's where I want to be in thinking about leaders out there today that have the experience, that have gone through these shifts before. How are you adapting? How are you
Mhm.
redefining your leadership style to match that preference for the younger workers that are coming in, because it's going to be really, really different.
Yes, absolutely. I think one piece of that I also try to be cognizant of, that I think will be a big piece of evolving our leadership styles, is not to overly stereotype either. Like it would
Mhm.
be easier for me to be like, oh, I'm managing Gen Z people. Here's my cookie cutter approach to managing someone. And to me, it comes back to like every person I lead and coach and manage is unique. And so, yes, maybe there are some schemas of like younger people tend to like this that could be helpful to start with. But I think as managers, we have to challenge ourselves to think uniquely about how do I care for and develop and grow and manage this person to their utmost capability, and not just get stuck in our like cookie cutter approach to leading
Yes.
them. But I'm excited to see how Gen Z leaders change the workplace, because to your point, I think millennial leaders are starting to, and it's going to even be crazier with Gen Z.
Yeah, totally. And I think to your point, it not about the stereotypes and like having one way. And I think it's leaning into that authenticity and understanding what it means and how you can align and bring your values, bring everything that you believe in wholeheartedly to the workplace and do it in an effective way that doesn't harm other people. It instead creates a safe place for growth.
I like that a lot.
So I think one interesting thing too is, like, I don't know if this is true, but I will be curious just thinking about burnout. I wonder if Gen Z, like the way that, again, generalizing here, but the way that a lot of folks in Gen Z are posturing themselves is, I want that work-life balance. I'm going to create my life and then see where work fits in, as you said. So I wonder if we'll see less burnout, because I know right now there is so much burnout,
Mhm.
especially, I mean, at all levels, right? But I think we're starting to hear more conversations around burnout at the executive level too. And, it kind of obviously, again, at all roles, but I don't think that I've heard as much before as I am now, executives being like, yeah, I'm burnt out. I'm on my last, I'm done. What are your thoughts on just what you're seeing with burnout right now, and particularly in tech, and how are you addressing this, or how do you think organizations should be addressing this and balance it with that constant push for growth and scale and build and go and, never stopping?
Yeah, to your point, I think COVID, there was a lot of conversation, particularly in the heart right at the beginning when we're all working from our houses, about burnout, and just felt like it was a topic that got raised to the roof in terms of people paying attention to it. And then as restrictions lessened, kind of dipped back down. And it feels like with the economic climate as it is, particularly in the world of tech and how that's put pressure on a lot of tech companies, this burnout is climbing back up again for executives, and conversation is happening about it again.
Mhm.
I have felt it. Like, I feel generally like a golden retriever about work, like excited to be joining a mission that I care about and come and care about people and build a business. And there are days where I feel that burnout of like, oh my gosh, or I get down on myself really easily
Mhm.
about like my own performance in the midst of this. And two things come to mind for me when I think about leaders struggling with that. One is this idea of self compassion. There's a book I love called Self-Compassion, The Power of Being Kind to Yourself. It's by Kristen Neff. And I think so often we, as executives, have high expectations for our businesses, for our people, and even more so for ourselves. And it's not my default nature. It's my default nature to have compassion for the other people in my life and have almost no compassion for myself in that.
Mm.
And so execs building a framework for self-compassion is so important. And then the second one would be self-awareness. Like for me, that comes through reading, diving deeper into things like the Enneagram so I could learn about myself, therapy, doing work with the inner voices and inner critics I have. But in short, I think how do we deal with burnout in wellness is encouraging mental, physical, financial, full health for people as part, it's a business's responsibility, in my opinion, to care about it. I think many business leaders say that these are their personal lives. It's on them entirely.
Mhm.
But again, if we're saying we're executives who care about people, who care about our stakeholders, how can we help them be the best, healthiest they can be? It's investing in things like financial health, mental health, physical health for our employees. So for me, I think wellness program and wellness spending, even in tight economies, I know people are locking down budget, but I see rising interest in it because more businesses are saying, I want to care about my people in this way.
That's a great message. There's so much individualism that happens with burnout. You think it's your fault and you play a role in that, right? You are accountable for some of that, but it's also on the onus of the organization and the onus of leadership to kind of rally around that topic.
I'll double down there. Like, I think each of us should take responsibility, like to turn and blame your organization for your own health. Like, I don't think that's healthy either. But I do think as leaders, like, why wouldn't we want to help our people be healthier? And if we go back to Mr. Shareholder here, like healthier people are, for every study, going to result in higher productivity and better outcomes for your organization. So it pays the bills as well to care about wellness and not only being good altruistic thing to do.
Yes, absolutely. I give a talk on productivity, reframing the way we think about productivity to, instead of it being this output centric concept where we're serving the bottom line and we're exhausting ourselves, like we're just kind of a cog in that, to reframing that as productivity through the lens of well-being so you can scale safely. Because like burnout is just, as you said, it costs an organization so much money when people are burnt out. They take time off, they lose trillions of dollars. And you have to really reframe the way you think about productivity in order to kind of, I don't know, maintain that balance and, as I said, scale safely.
Yeah, I really like that phrase. It's got my brain spinning, scale safely, because right off the bat, I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, that sounds wonderful. And then on the other side, I'm thinking like growth and confidence only come through risk successfully approached with courage, or like you have to put yourself out there to gain growth and confidence. And so it's like, I think that is always the tension of a leader is how do you provide safety, but also like the real feeling of risk.
Mm-hmm.
There's a great Liz and Molly image. I don't know if you follow any of their art, but it's a manager holding an umbrella and like preventing rain from coming on, this big storm from coming on their people. And I love part of that for the safety piece of it. But I also think sometimes it's our job as managers to push people out in the rain so that they can grow a little and face the storm themselves. So I'm curious, as you think about coaching executives and any type of employee, how do you think about that like risk safety spectrum and pushing people along that?
Yeah, I love that. I always go back to psychological safety because I think that if you're creating a space where it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to use your voice, it's okay to show up authentically, and you're also witnessing leaders do that, they're leading by example, I think that you're just generally gonna lean more into taking risks. and you're going to feel more comfortable in that kind of a setting because there might not be a safety net, but you understand that like it's okay to fail. You know, if I fail, it's not the end of my job. It's not the end of, you know, like nobody's dying in our industry. Like there are industries where people do die.
There are no rarely tech emergencies. Yes.
Yeah, right. So I always lean into psychological safety because I think that if you feel safe in your environment and you don't perceive everything as a threat, like if you are not threatened all the time, if you're not activated all the time and you have a regulated nervous system, right? That's the point of psychological safety, is to help people be more regulated and allow that connection to happen naturally. So if you can be regulated, then you're not seeing all of these things that aren't really threats become threats. I think it unlocks creative thinking, and I think it unlocks the willingness to execute on those ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I land right with you that like the core foundation is that psychological safety. And then from there, it's on us as leaders to create pockets of risk and growth where it feels like you can grow, but you can grow with some net beneath you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, I mean, with burnout, like I help a lot of my clients work through burnout and figure out balance. And I just don't think that there's a lot of education around our brains and our bodies. Like what is actually happening when you're in burnout is very fascinating. But I don't think that there's enough education around that. You know, like how do you actually get yourself out of burnout? And what does it mean to regulate your nervous system? Do you know what your nervous system is? Do you know what your brain is doing and why you're experiencing the symptoms that you're experiencing? And I think that there needs to be a lot more education on that topic.
Yeah, I love that. It is really like biological and primal in so many ways. You're obviously more of an expert than I am, but gosh, when I think about the times where I have hit my like lowest points of well-being as a leader, really it is about regulation across my life. It's like having like if I'm burnt out as a leader and I'm still like pulling out my laptop and feeling the pressure to work from 9 to midnight every night and like go hard, it is hard to get re-regulated. Or like if my Slack is binging all night while I'm trying to be present with my kids, like it's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I would love
it makes
to learn.
it worse.
I think you should educate the world on it. Let's do it. I'll listen.
I'm trying. So thinking about this mantra in tech, move fast and break things, bash things, like there's a component of this that I think does open up the door to risk and what we're talking about, right? And take risks, and it's okay if things break, but like we got to move fast. But on the other hand, you know, we're talking about being regulated and creating psychological safety. And this mantra, like, I don't know, what are your thoughts on it? Does it just create this false sense of urgency that then dysregulates people, or what are we doing with it?
Yeah, I am out on this phrase, so I'm leaving it. But it's funny saying that. One of my favorite professors in business school, they said the answer is always, it depends. And so I do think like the idea behind moving fast, particularly in early stage startups, like speed is your advantage to succeeding as a business. And so there is value to like moving fast, being able to ship an MVP. But to your point, at what expense? You know, moving too fast with people changes, really terrible idea, in my opinion. Moving fast when it's putting your customers at risk or putting your experience at risk or putting data at risk. Like these are really challenging things that move fast and break things do not set us up well for caring about. So I'd probably rewrite it to something like move as fast as you can with care, like move fast with care, basically. So if you can go 80 miles an hour normally and break things, but you can go 60 and still navigate the road thoughtfully, like go 60. So move fast with care would probably be how I would adapt it. What's your take there?
That's such an awesome reframe. Move fast with care. Yeah, I mean, for me, when I hear the term move fast and break things, I can feel things happening in my body. My nervous system hates that. It hates it.
Yes.
I perceive that very much as a threat.
Mm-hmm.
I also know from my own experience, moving fast is not when I do my best work. It's actually when I do my worst work because I make
Interesting.
mistakes. I
Yeah.
cut corners. I'm not, as you say, I'm not caring about the things that I do. I forget to lean into empathy. I forget to ask the questions that I really want to ask so I can get the full context of things. And moving fast for me personally does not work. I need a thoughtful, careful, strategic approach. That has just been me for the entirety of my life. My dad, I grew up playing soccer, and this was something that I saw other people do, and I was a forward and I wanted to move fast, and I was fast. But when I did it without care, as you say, I fucked up, and like I would break away and I wouldn't think about what I was doing, and I would miss the shot, or I would not think about what I was doing. I would break away. I would get called off sides. Like there were all these things that would happen. And my dad came up with this mantra for me, and it was Hana, go lightly. And
Mm.
I have very much had to live my adult life with that mantra in mind, because I know that I have been in situations where the leadership wants you to move fast and break things. And I always just have to remind myself, like, just because you have the permission to do that doesn't mean that you should, and
Mm.
approach it with that Hana go lightly mindset.
I love that. It also reminds me of what we were talking about earlier with unique approaches to leadership for each individual employee. And if you're Facebook and you emblazon move fast and break things on the wall and say that's like a speed limit sign that says 100, not every employee should be going the same speed limit to drive safely on that road. Like maybe Ben is excited about trying to go 80 at work and that works for him. Or Hana needs to go 50 and that's what works for her. But it's also like sensitivity as a manager to know where does this person's strength lie? Where does this person do their best work, and help them dial in like what is the right balance of care and speed for their maximum output and health.
Yeah. Yeah. Understanding that speed limit for each individual, for sure. And also, like, if I move fast, I'm going to burn out. That's
Totally.
that's a road to burnout for
Yeah.
me.
I love to move fast like that. I think that's a trait that I do well. And one of the hardest things for me as a leader, and I think this is hard for lots of leaders, is when people go different speeds than you or approach a problem in a different way, where I'm like, well, why can't we just ship this thing this morning? You can jump on, we can publish it in like 20 or 30 minutes. It'll be ready to go. And I have had to grow in that to say, like, okay, people who work for me or my peers or my boss's speed limit is really different than mine. And recognizing that that's not a value judgment, I'm not better or worse because of that. It's just
Mhm.
different. And we have to show up differently at work with those people as a result.
Yeah, that's a great non-judgmental approach. Understanding, okay, what does move fast mean for you? The definitions of that, and
Mm-hmm.
non-judgmentally just understanding, just being curious about, okay, you want to move fast at this speed. I need to know what that means for you. And then how can
Mm-hmm.
we collaborate based on my definition of moving fast?
Yes. And it really is about, I think that comes down to like getting good agreements. Like
Yes.
Max Yoder, Kyle talked about him a little on his episode of the podcast, but he was our CEO at Lesson Lean. He wrote a book called Do Better Work that I would highly recommend to all of your listeners. But one of the chapters is about getting agreements. And so often we just make assumptions about how we will work together
Mhm.
rather than overtly having the conversation to say, hey, here's typically how I operate or how I'd want to approach this project. Could hearing what the other person says and then aligning together to say, great, here's the agreement we're going to make on how this project or our team is going to work. And so many unsaid assumptions are what creates stress at work. And so the more we can create clarity as leaders, as again, Queen Bernays says, clear is kind, but the more we can create clarity and then also get aligned agreements across our team, the healthier we're going to be able to be.
Oh, I'm so on board with that. The one thing I'll as a follow-up, I'll ask is, because I encounter this in coaching all the time. Why do you feel like there's so much fear around having these conversations, particularly at work?
Hmm. Why do I feel like there's so much fear about having which conversations?
The direct conversations, the ones that actually do provide the clarity. And, in coaching, somebody will come to me and maybe they're having a communication issue with their manager. And at the end of it, right, they're designing these solutions, but they know that they need to go and talk to their manager and have the direct conversation. But oftentimes there's a lot of fear there. There's fear of having that conversation. And I think a lot of people experience that.
Yeah. It's funny. This week, just scrolling Instagram Reels, I saw both Condoleezza Rice and Colin Powell, so two relatively accomplished, significantly accomplished leaders, both separately say trust was the number one thing they wanted to engender as a leader. And so when I think about that, I think the reason people don't come to their managers and have real conversations is because of a lack of trust. They don't trust that they're not going to get punished. They don't trust that there's psychological safety. They don't trust that the existing way of doing business is not going to significantly change or that they're going to get judged. And so going way back to the top of the episode, I think, it's about that connection and building that relationship. And when you've done that as a leader, you're going to create the conditions in which people feel like they can come up to you and say, hey, when you did this, it made me feel this way. Or, hey, I'm feeling this about a project. I think what's also interesting about this is I think sometimes leaders are uncomfortable to have the conversation. Leaders don't want to give feedback where we feel like we want someone to do something differently. We're in the position of having actual authority, but we still shy away from giving the feedback. Again, maybe it's we feel like we need to be, it's too mean or it's too aggressive, but I do believe that feedback is a gift. The only way people grow and our teams grow and change is giving that feedback. So that is definitely something I'm always working on with my Too Nice leadership, is trying to know and commit to always providing people feedback that may feel uncomfortable to give as a leader at the time, but is worth it for both them and me.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. And as with most of these episodes, we uncover foundationally that psychological safety is a critical piece of any kind of leadership. In order to create a safe place for people and also allow everyone to collaborate in a way where you're reaching and pushing towards the organizational goals. Everybody wins with psychological safety.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. My favorite book on psychological safety is Culture Code. I don't know if you've read it, but if anyone is looking to dive deeper into the world of psychological safety, that's my favorite primer to it. Chapter 1 of that book just is all about psychological safety. So if you can't tell, I love to read. That's like one of my foremost hobbies. So I'm just tossing book recommendations left and right. But
I love it.
That's one way I've grown a lot as a leader, is just reading a lot. So I firmly believe all leaders are readers, or at least podcast listeners.
Yes, agree. Culture Code. No, I'm writing these down and we'll include all of those in the show notes. I haven't read that one. I made an intentional decision to move away from reading marketing or branding specific leadership books. And where I get really interested, as you have probably gathered, is the neuroscience side of it. So I'm such a nerd. I'll go read like academic journals on Dr. David Starf's model. And so no one wants those recommendations.
Yeah, I agree. I went pretty hard in the leadership world for a while, but so much goodness comes from things that are like ancillarily related to that, whether that's like behavioral science, or I read a book about hospitality earlier this year that like changed my way of thinking. History is another area that I really like to learn from. So I support you.
Yes. Well, hopefully this will encourage people to expand their horizons a little bit. But to wrap things up, since I want to respect your time, I could talk about this with you all day. If we're thinking about the future and transforming leadership, which we've obviously been talking all about here, what would you challenge fellow tech leaders to do when they're thinking about transformational change in their leadership approach?
Yeah, I haven't used this word yet today, so maybe it'll make some people uncomfortable, but I would say my challenge to more tech leaders would to ask yourself, what if your goal was to love your team And I know that feels kind of cheesy. And I know I just had a bunch of people unsubscribe from this podcast about like loving your team feels cheesy. And I'm not advocating for like unconditional love. Work is not your family. You don't even have to like the people you are choosing to love as a leader. But I think at the heart of like a wholehearted serving leadership approach is saying this person is not a cog. This person is not a tool. This person is a human. And my goal is to love them, and loving them is coaching them to be better at their job. It's giving them feedback. It's helping them be well. It's pushing them when they need a push. So again, not all sunshine and rainbows, and love isn't sunshine and rainbows if you've ever been in love, but it is just that phrase feels a little inflammatory, that there'll be a whole cadre of leaders who say like, love is not in my vocabulary of leadership, but I think it should be. I had a CEO once upon a time who would tell us that he loved us, like say, I love you. And that like felt uncomfortable the first few times. And I'm sure there's HR leaders listening to this who are like, not okay. But for so many of us, it was actually really meaningful. It showed that they gave a shit about us, that they like cared about us as human beings. And so more leaders with love in their lexicon and in their actions would be how I'd push tech leaders to think differently.
I personally think that that is beautiful advice. And I will add to that too. If what Ben just said makes you uncomfortable, open that up, unpack that. Why? Because our concept of love, the way that we're taught to talk and think about love, I think it's too narrow.
Mm-hmm.
So if it makes you uncomfortable, explore it. Ask yourself why. And I appreciate you bringing that to the table so our listeners can do some digging around their beliefs on love. So thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me, Hana. It was fun to chat, fun to hear your takes on things. And I will keep following along to hear more.
Yes, you're awesome, Ben. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode. I hope you walk away with something empowering that you can take into your own leadership journey. Are you a high-performing executive looking to take your career to the next level? Or maybe you're an emerging leader who wants to develop the skills you need to advance in your role and show up authentically. Or maybe you're experiencing burnout and struggling to find a better work-life balance. Whatever your situation is, one-on-one coaching can help you achieve your personal and professional goals. If you're interested in experiencing the power of coaching for yourself, head on over to hypehousecoaching.com/start-coaching-now, where you can set up a one-on-one leadership and executive coaching intro session for free. Remember, the only hype that really matters is the hype within.